Welcome everybody, I'm Josh Fenton of GoLocal Prov. I want to welcome Val Endress, guru of politics and communications at Rhode Island College. How are you today?
I'm fine, Josh. Thank you for having me.
Did you watch the entire debate?
I did.
You made it all the way through.
I was tempted to go to bed, but I watched the whole thing.
Listen, you are in Rhode Island one of the leading experts on analyzing these things. You've been at debates all over the place. You've been at primaries. You've seen it all. Let's talk about last night's performance. I think the take going into the battle was people need to beat up Bernie and knock him back because he is now emerged as the national frontrunner, both in state-by-state polls, but now for the first time consistently as the #1 Democrat outpacing Joe Biden. What happened last night?
Well, certainly that's exactly what they did. And the focus of attention was on Bernie for the first time as a frontrunner. And one could say that he handled it fairly well, but he really didn't give the Democratic base who's looking for a reason to vote for him any reason to do so.
Yeah.
And so his positives are that he really is very consistent with his message. But the negative part of that is that he's not willing to compromise or to moderate some of his policies. And so he's able to solidify his base and perhaps add to his base, which is risky business when we get into, Super Tuesday, whether he can do that.
Right.
But overall, the focus of attention was on him, but he skirted and changed the topic, and the moderators allowed him to do so.
They also seem to miss opportunities. They seem to have him on the ropes. There was a Buttigieg, and I think it was Warren, but it might have been Klobuchar, about paying for his health care.
Yes.
And he wasn't quite able to answer it. And then all of a sudden they just let him off. And he escaped. And then the bell rang and we were into a commercial break or whatever the break was.
But I blame the moderators for that because there were several instances where they could have slowed down the debate and said, let's work through the numbers. And let's explain your policy from that point of view. And by the way, I think that's what America's looking for. His policies and his explanations are pretty nuanced.
Right. And
that's difficult to portray in a debate unless you have the moderator's help. And Elizabeth Warren left that opening and comparing her policies to his policies. And that would have been a great opportunity, especially for progressives that are going back and forth about the two of them, to have some distinction between the two candidates.
I thought it was also interesting after a week ago in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Mayor Bloomberg had as disastrous a debate as one has ever had anywhere, anytime. I mean, you really have to go to Jerry Ford claiming that Poland was was not behind the Iron Curtain, and Carter just standing there, not even having to say a word, that the sitting president did not know what made up the communist bloc. Now it comes a week later, you would think, his staff, his consultants would have him locked in a room, waterboarding him to have the right, and it really wasn't any better. He was just less of the point of attention this time, but he seems to struggle with every aspect of answering even the most basic question.
He's clearly not ready for prime time, and this is one of the problems that happens when you drop into a race, and we see this happening practically every election, thinking that they can skirt the scrutiny of Iowa and New Hampshire.
Right.
And I'm not talking about just the primary itself, but the year windup.
Right.
And that's where you get vetted by the public, you get vetted by the media. And so what emerges is somebody who's not ready for prime time at all.
Right.
And didn't have the talent to be able to pull that off. And he spent 3 days in debate prep and pulled himself off the campaign. And if that's the best that he can do, that's problematic. But I do want to add that there are really two Mikes in this campaign.
Yes.
One is the person who's very forceful and very effective in the ads, and then there's the Mike Bloomberg in the debates.
But can you have that level of separation every piece of media, I don't care if it's social media and meme, is undercutting those claims of being big and strong in your television spots, regardless of how many hundreds of millions of dollars, and everyone is making fun of you around the country, including Democrats.
Right.
Right.
Well, even at this time in the election, although during the primary time interest is peaking,
Right.
we still have an awful lot of people who aren't paying attention and aren't reading about the election. And so, for example, one of his ads played during the debate, which
Right.
reminds them again that he has some very effective strategies that he's using against Trump.
Right.
And I do want to talk about the fact, too, that he can buy into the media markets in Super Tuesday in Texas and California where the other candidates cannot, and has flooded the airways in being able to do that. And Tom Steyer has proven
Right.
that in South Carolina that his ads have been effective in eroding the Joe Biden's base.
Let's go to. I'm going to jump. Let's just finish on South Carolina. What's your take? What are we going to see coming out of Saturday's primary?
Oh, that's a great question. I think Joe Biden will hold on to his lead. The question becomes,
Is it 31-29 over Bernie, something like that?
He's going to be in trouble unless he has a decisive double-digit lead,
Yeah.
at least. And that may lead an opening for the other moderates, but the problem is who?
Right.
The one thing that South Carolina will do is winnow the field.
Yeah.
There simply are candidates who will not be able to afford, and a lot of them are hanging on for Super Tuesday. But a fourth place finish or a fifth place finish isn't going to allow them to move forward. Now who emerges from that is anybody's guess.
It was interesting. We had a piece Monday, did an interview with Tad Devine, who's been involved at a high level
Absolutely.
in almost every Democratic campaign for presidency going back to 1980. And he had Bernie.
That's right.
In 16, he had Yang in 20. He said a very interesting thing. He said, Bernie's getting a huge advantage. 4 years ago, you needed to get 50% to win a Democratic primary. Now you have to get 25,
That's
27.
Right. That's
and
right.
It's wildly helped
That's right.
his momentum.
And that's such an important point because nobody knows whether Bernie can go beyond his base.
Right.
And he's always had that 24 to 25%.
Right.
But can he grow that base? And some of the more recent surveys that I've seen says, for example, in a general election, he will have to depend upon the way, in terms of his campaign style, he will have to depend upon young people and Latinx coming out for him. Those are two groups that traditionally don't necessarily come out to vote. They're one of the
And
lowest voting groups.
we're not seeing numbers like Barack Obama generated in the Democratic
No.
primaries like we did in 08.
No.
Those numbers were off the charts. They were records.
That's
Those
right.
were big numbers.
That's
and
right.
really what we're seeing is kind of 4 years ago level of interest by the voter.
That's right, and we are seeing a little bit of a surge with black voters with Bernie, but it's not going to make the difference right now. And as long as Joe Biden is in the race, he's not probably going to make inroads there. So he's largely untested to see whether he can get beyond the threshold, his traditional threshold.
So we come out of South Carolina. Joe Biden finally breaks through and wins one. Micro slows the Sanders momentum. I think there's generally that sort of impact. We go into Super Tuesday. Second thing that Tad Devine said is Bernie has the money to compete in Texas, in California.
Yes.
And no one else does other than obviously Bloomberg. And he can turn on money whenever he needs
Yes.
to. It's an incredible force that he can raise. I know it was $25 million in January. I cannot imagine what he's raised in February. It's got to be $35 million.
Yes, those numbers are coming out, but the predictions are, again, he's going to be ahead.
Right.
Now, Elizabeth Warren, and given her positive debate performance in Nevada,
Right.
has seen a surge in fundraising, and according
She
to her
raised $9
campaign.
million in
That's
3
right.
days or 4
That's
days.
right. But the difference between Bernie and Elizabeth Warren is that she depends upon a very vast and complicated infrastructure.
Right.
She has over 1,000 people who are working in individual precincts to get out the vote. And oddly enough, that has not worked. That's one of the great mysteries of this campaign. Why hasn't Elizabeth Warren done better? Because of her ground game. If she starts to bleed money where she can't raise as much as she's spending, because her outlay is quite large at this point, that means her infrastructure collapses.
Right.
Bernie doesn't really depend upon it in the same way. And part of that is his recognition from the last campaign, his loyal followers, his base itself can help to carry and certainly raise the money that he needs. So you're absolutely right, and Dan Devine's right about that. Ted Devine, sorry.
You were thinking Notre Dame football.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about Bernie post the Nevada win. He goes on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, starts defending Fidel Castro's literacy programs, then doubles down on it in the CNN town hall, infuriating certain segments of Latino voters, obviously Southern Floridians.
That's right.
And also people who just care about human rights. I mean, Fidel Castro's record as a benevolent dictator is a mixed bag and had lots of human rights violations. Was that a good strategy for him? Was that a faux pas, and why keep doubling down on it?
I don't know. And the one thing that we know about Bernie is that he is consistent in his message, and he's said it in the past, and he's not going to take it back. But debates aren't the time for nuance.
Right.
And he doesn't have the wherewithal to actually explain this beyond shouting, and that's his style. Bernie's not wrong about the programs that he's talking about. Cuba does have a very effective healthcare system in certain segments. And the literacy program there has some success.
But that's like saying North Korea's army is very neat
that's,
and well put together.
That's right. And that's where you run into problems. And again, if you're looking at the electoral map, that's not a wise strategy. How do you get people back in Southern Florida with that kind of strategy? And what voters like about Bernie is that he's honest. And in some ways, he's the bookend to Donald Trump in that way. And he attracts voters because he says exactly what's on his mind and what he believes. But the problem is, can he run a race against Donald Trump that way? And can he bring the rest of the Democratic base with him? Because what he needs to do as the nominee is to unite everybody together. That's absolutely what he needs to do. And he has to get out the vote. And these kinds of statements doesn't really lead to that outcome.
No, you're not taking time out of work. Let's go to the moderators. At many times last night, there were 2 to 3 conversations taking place amongst the debaters, and in many cases, it was just a yell-a-thon. What went wrong with CBS?
Several things, and we've seen this tendency before, but I think this is one of the worst debates as a result of what the moderators did or they didn't do. And you can understand a network's compulsion to showcase their talent.
Right.
But there were simply too many people on the stage. And so everybody had their own question that they wanted to ask. There was no continuity with the questions.
First portion, they had 3 interviewers, moderators, and then the second portion, they went to 5.
Yes.
Other than morning cartoons, I think every segment of CBS's programming was represented.
And one of the problems that I'm going to talk about this and compare it to our local debates, which I think our moderators have been very good over the years. And I've done quite a bit of research on what audience perspectives are on the moderators. And very consistently, and this also speaks to the national research as well, the audiences want 1 or 2 moderators. They want the questions focused. They want follow-up. And they want some continuity there. And what we had on display there, and they couldn't take control of the candidates when they needed to.
Right.
And a moderator has to feel, now they have some flexibility. They have to feel when to jump in and when to change the subject, when to follow up.
So you're looking for a great political moderator who controls the dialogue. Maybe CBS's motivation is we want to see a knife fight and a car crash simultaneous on this stage in South Carolina because it's simply more entertaining.
Yeah, well, it didn't work. And I would say when all's said and done about the debates, and I was talking to some people online who were voters that were simply looking for somebody to vote for in Massachusetts because it's early voting now.
Right.
And several of them gave up at the end of it, and it became this two white men yelling at each other. and I'll give you an example of how the moderators could have controlled the debate. It was quieter when they started talking about foreign policy.
Right.
But the problem was that the candidates were all saying the same thing, that we need to rely upon our allies.
No one's ever won a presidential election based on foreign policy.
Well, except for this is a time when you can help to separate some of the candidates. And I understand what you're saying, but they certainly weren't picking up on the issues of the day for domestic policy.
Right.
We saw nothing on climate change. We saw nothing on the coronavirus until Mike Bloomberg turned and started talking about sugar drinks versus coronavirus. But with the foreign policy discussion, what they could have done is followed up and say, what do you mean about getting together with the allies? What does that mean for the audience? And so those follow-up questions really helped to separate the candidates. And there were virtually no follow-up questions that were happening because you had to get on to the new moderator.
Well, I think the biggest disappointment is when Bernie says this program is going to do X. There's no question to the rest of the candidates that says, will you support Bernie Sanders' program? Yes or no?
That's right.
And, obviously in most cases, he has proposals in, like the new Green Deal, and his colleagues who are in Congress have not signed on to it.
Yes.
So that's the answer to that question. Well, you're saying you did now, but you didn't sign on to his bill. So I agree with you. I do think that there has become this entertainment focus of the debates that are so prevalent that people want to see shouting and screaming and arm wrestling and noogies and things like that right there on the screen.
But we saw that last week.
And people loved it. It got the best ratings, and it got hyped as having the best ratings. Let's go to Super Tuesday. We're anticipating a Joe Biden slight victory. Who comes out of a Super Tuesday?
I wish I knew. I think.
Can you do sports betting now in Rhode Island on the primaries around the country?
I've often said that.
Right, in England you can bet on everything. Yes. What color is the new prince? The baby's going to be delivered on. Who's the grandchild or whatever
That's right.
it is.
I don't think that Pete Buttigieg, here's one of the problems. Each one of those candidates have experienced a surge at one time or another. And as a result of that, they still think they have legs.
But let me tell you, all candidates who run for all offices, I'm telling you, all candidates who run for all offices think they can win.
Yes,
right?
Yes, they do have that blind eye.
The Republican candidate who has only raised $70, who is running against a sitting Democratic congressman in Rhode Island, still thinks they're going to win. There's going to be, because some crazy election happens somewhere every 10 years and it empowers all this insane thinking.
Well, look at Lincoln Chafee and running, yes. And I don't think that Pete Buttigieg has staying power just simply because he hasn't been able to capture the black vote and the Latinx vote.
Yeah.
And there are still possibilities. Will maybe with some of these faux pas with Bernie Sanders, will people give Elizabeth Warren a second look? That's really a possibility. Or it could be that just Joe Biden rises to the top there. Whether he can influence turnout and get people excited, I think people are worried about that. Amy Klobuchar doesn't look like she has too much of a future. I don't know how long Steyer and Bloomberg will stay into the race. I think this is where maybe the DNC comes into play here and talks to Bloomberg and Steyer and tell them that for the good of the party, it's time to leave.
Right.
And that could be a possibility. And Steyer has pledged that he will support the candidates. Bloomberg did a little bit more reluctantly with the money, and that certainly is going to be helpful if they do so. And so Super Tuesday, will, as I said before, we'll see that winnowing, but in what direction that goes, I don't know. I mean, at the very beginning, everybody thought that Joe Biden was unstoppable, but they were thinking about the Joe Biden of 4 years ago or 8 years ago.
So I always had a different view because I worked in the Senate for John Chafee and George Mitchell, and I always say I was there for roughly 5 years. And if there were 100 dumb statements said by the United States, the body of the United States, and 50 of them were made by Joe Biden. And I can think of 5 or 6 of them that haven't even come out yet. I'm sure the Trump people are holding those, but it was just blunder after blunder. And obviously he's run twice before for president, and you know, none of it seems any better.
But does that make him the perfect foil for Donald Trump?
No,
and
I don't think so.
It's, and that's the question to be asked. Now everybody was questioning last night why Elizabeth Warren was going after Bloomberg instead of Bernie.
I think actually, I think it was smarter than you think.
Oh, I do too.
Because if she goes too hard after Bernie, she'll never get the Bernie people to come over. And number 2 is, I'm winning points and raising money off of beating up a billionaire.
Well,
that tees me up also for potentially in the fall.
Well, and also Mike Bloomberg looks like Donald Trump in some ways.
In many ways.
And so it shows that she has the wherewithal to be in the presidential debate.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if those strategies will work. I thought those strategies would work by now, and they have not.
Yeah.
She's had very weak showings. But also, let's remember that not, we haven't really been tested with the number of delegates yet. So I think Super Tuesday is a make or break for Elizabeth Warren. And probably what to watch is the percentage of the vote versus Bernie's vote.
So thinking that Bloomberg and Steyer may stay in past Super Tuesday just because they have the money and they have nothing better to do to some degree with their lives. And Klobuchar is almost out of money, and she spent her last remaining $2 or $3 million on Super Tuesday. Warren will begin to lessen her ability to stay competitive. You could have, coming out of this, 5 white men coming out of Super Tuesday, and the 2 remaining women, no minorities on the say. Donald Trump they should just take his Twitter account from him. Couldn't tee up better for him.
That's right. I mean, who would have guessed that this is the case?
But the Democrats have this unique ability to find the perfect pathway to finding defeat. I mean, it's almost amazing.
That's right.
To be able to do it. And Tad Devine mentioned, he was like, and Ralph Nader in 2000.
That's right.
I mean, in Florida, you take those Nader votes, you even take, a third of them over to the Republican, and they win going away, and Al Gore's the president of the United States.
It could be that Warren and Klobuchar, for that very reason, because of gender, have more staying power.
Yeah.
The question is, where do the dropout candidate support go?
Right.
And that's another question.
And that's a legacy question, right? Do I want to put my name out there? If I'm Pete Buttigieg, and I'm 38, 39 years old, do I want to say I'm supporting the policies of Bernie Sanders?
That's right.
Right? That's a long way away from what I've been talking about.
That's right. And they all have political futures.
Correct.
If you look at
Joe Biden, maybe not.
Joe Biden, maybe not. Elizabeth Warren, hard to tell. People like to see her in the Senate, and that's part of the angst in Massachusetts.
Potentially.
Or as a VP is a possibility. But you're absolutely right about that. Does he actively campaign, or does he hold back? And again, it's another setup for how Democrats can shoot themselves in the foot.
We've got you here. It is chaos in the State House. Speaker of the House, that is arguably the most powerful political position in the state of Rhode Island, controls the budget, controls the laws, influences judges, almost everything else, is now the subject of an ongoing state grand jury linked to a potential federal grand jury relating to Dr. Pedro. Has lots of battering and bruising. The governor is smelling blood and seems to be circling. There are rumors about
The Women's Caucus.
The Women's Caucus, the executive director of the Democratic Party has now resigned.
Convention Center.
And then you add in Barbara Ann Fenton Fung, no relation to me, announcing that she is running, and she is a very viable candidate.
Yes.
She can raise money, at
Yes.
least Republican
Yes.
money. Is he all done?
I don't know, but if I were in the Republican Party, that's who I would choose to run against him. And people, I mean, if you look at her resume,
Right.
it's not wide.
Right.
But you also have to look at the kind of influence that she had in his campaigns
Yeah.
and her own fundraising ability. And in Cranston,
Yeah.
you know, and we're talking about a district that leans to the Republicans.
Yeah.
And if you look at Mattiello, and I'm comparing it to the Stephen Freyas race, you know, Mattiello only beat him by 85 votes the first time and 300 votes
Yeah.
the second time, or
Right.
85, 95 votes. And so just on that perspective, he's vulnerable.
Right.
Now you're running against somebody who has name recognition, and with the change of her name,
Right.
that helps. And also you have a woman running in his place. And so I think he may be in the fight for his life here, his political
Yeah, I got to
life.
tell you, I mean, I think we all know Steve Frias. He's not going to win a lot of votes at the door, personality-wise.
Right, exactly.
She is going to win a lot
That's
of votes at the
right.
door.
That's right.
And you can call this a battle for the leadership of the state or whatever. But when you're standing at home and you just got the kids home from practice and you're making dinner and somebody knocks on your door and the person's likable and charming
That's right.
and says something, and you say, oh, that other guy's in trouble all the time.
Yes.
I'll vote for you.
Yes, and let's not forget that Helen Fung is very well liked in the city of Cranston, so
Yes.
that's going to carry some weight as well.
Right.
And will he be campaigning?
I believe so.
I think he will be.
Yeah.
So I
It is,
think this
it is
is
a hard
really
thing to
interesting
go home
race.
and say to your wife, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to go door to door for you today.
Yes, that I think it's a perfect foil right now.
Anything we are learning about the change? You know, in '08 we learned the power of email. In '16 we learned the power of social media. Are we learning anything in this election that's going to transfer into local elections, the governor's race in 2022? Are we seeing anything begin to develop now?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, when it's a presidential race, and I don't think that there are new forms of campaigning that are coming on board, but if you can't very effectively use your social media presence, and part of the reason that I say that is that millennials are coming of age.
Right.
And so we're seeing that they're buying houses and
it's their first
professional
media.
jobs.
It's not their other media.
It's their only media,
Yeah.
and even the news feeds that they get, and you know, GoLocal is the wave of the future, right?
We've driven this company off of social media and email.
Absolutely, and so they get all of their news feeds from there. So if you can't effectively and people underestimate that, and they're still looking at the baby boomers. But these are people now who are having children that are settling in school districts and everything else. And so there has to be a pivot with office holders in the state of Rhode Island to start listening to some of their concerns.
Right.
That they can't afford a mortgage, that college tuition is unaffordable for them, and it's saddled them with debt. I'm not saying that we have to look at the solutions of Elizabeth Warren,
Right.
but we have to start paying attention to that generation who's becoming the new stable generation
Listen,
for Rhode
everybody
Island.
in the history of politics in America votes their pocketbook one way or the other. Doesn't
That's
really
right.
matter what other issue it is. So if you can hit on those message points, I think Donald Trump's danger point is this little blip on the stock market on
Yeah.
coronavirus
Yes.
turns into maybe a bigger hit on
Yes.
on the stock market and carries forward to some international trade issues and trickles down and slows the economy not from a 2% GDP, but maybe down to a 0.5
Yes.
or a negative GDP. And then people are rethinking the whole election process.
You are absolutely right. And this is Donald Trump's nightmare scenario,
Right.
that the economy turns on him. And of course, Democrats have been predicting, and economists have predicting, that we're overdue for a recession.
Right.
And so we know that that's cyclical. And it certainly probably will happen in the next presidential administration, and we haven't seen those predictions come to
Right.
fruition yet.
The other
but
thing-
still,
Yeah, please.
he something like the coronavirus, like you said before, anything that just slows down the economy takes away from his arguments.
Right.
People may not vote for him because they like him, but they're voting for him because of pocketbook issues. And if that starts to fade, that's a problem.
It'll also be a very different recession. We've both been around long enough to have lived through a few. If you're about 34 or under, you've never seen a non-growth economy.
That's an interesting point.
And they're, as we all know, they're painful, but they're really painful if you're not having any understanding of it.
That's
so
right.
you've spent up to the limit, you get these big college loans, you have a house maybe bigger than
That's
you
right.
need, and one of you loses their job. And that becomes a very, very painful cycle.
Well, and you're absolutely right about that, and we can bring that back to the state of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
It was a very painful recession the last time. We were one of the first in and the last out, and in some ways we still haven't fully recovered
Right.
from that recession.
And by the way, the banking crisis, I mean, .com, we've seen three doozies here.
That's right.
Maybe the banking crisis of 1990 was the most, maybe even worse than the Great Recession
That's
here
right.
in this state.
That's
because
right.
There was simply no access to capital.
Well, and you have a large population, I'm going to go back to the millennials again, who are going to make decisions about whether they're going to stay in the state of Rhode Island or are they going for more fertile grounds.
Right.
And are they even moving to the state of Massachusetts? We all know Rhode Islanders love their state.
Yeah.
But if we have the kind of recession that we had in the past, and we're also bleeding population as it is, we're talking about one of our congressional districts being collapsed. And so if we look at it from that perspective, Rhode Island has a lot more to lose.
Yeah. Listen, Val Endress, always a delight. Great
This was
having
fun.
you in. So much fun today. And hopefully we can get you back maybe right after Super Tuesday.
Oh, that would be
put it on your
marvelous. That would be
schedule.
marvelous.
And maybe we'll have Skype World set
Well,
up
that's
and we'll
great.
have the whole world chirping in today. Thank you so much for coming in. We
My
will
pleasure.
be back potentially later today, definitely back tomorrow. Lots of things going on around the state of Rhode Island and across the world. And it's all tied together. This coronavirus is really tied in. Just have a story up about Assumption College up in Worcester. They have a campus in Rome, and they are trying to figure out what to do with their campus in Rome right as we speak. Take a look at that story. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you back. Thank you.